Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. Before we dive into today's episode, I just wanted to let you know that I have created and released on YouTube a series of video called I'm Pregnant, Now What?, which is available for free on YouTube on my channel Cuppa with a Doula. And this series is aimed at mums, pregnant women, or mums to be who are wanting to learn how to navigate the system. So in this series, I am taking you through the different models of care that are available for you in Australia. I'm taking you through how to navigate the system in terms of what does consent mean, what really is involved in consenting to something, how to ask questions so that you are informed in your pregnancy. I'm also taking you through the different types of questions that you might want to ask your care provider at each stage of your pregnancy, the variation of normal that exists. Obviously, we're all different size, different shape, we're all different, and so are babies, and so much more. So if you're pregnant, if you're expecting, if you know someone who is expecting, please tell them about this series I have created. I am really on a journey to try and empower you and moms out there to just be in charge of their pregnancy and just take control and learn how to navigate the system. So please, I would love it if you could share it, spread the word out there. It's free, it's on YouTube. I'll put the link in the show notes of this episode. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode today. The only reason why this podcast exists is because of you guys listening. So thank you so much. And I hope you enjoyed this episode. Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. In today's episode, I'm interviewing a very special guest. No, I'm kidding. It's me. Just wanted to deflate it a bit. I am once again stepping behind the mic for a very special reason. So, as most of you know, last year I announced that I was pregnant with our second child. And I have recorded my pregnancy journey for this pregnancy and my first birth with my first daughter. So I will put the links to those 3 episodes in the show notes in case you want to go and have a listen before you listen to this one, because there will be links made to either of those 3 episodes. And so in today's episode, I really wanted to share my birth story for my second birth, only for the reason that this podcast is by no stretch about me, but I know that a few people have been asking how this birth was and so on, and it went very much not how I expected it to go, and it was very much a learning experience, I guess, and so therefore I really wanted to share it with you guys, and in the hope that you can learn something from it. And in today's episode, I am taking you through the rest of my third trimester and how my birth unfolded for my second daughter. Things definitely did not go to plan. I think I told you guys in my second pregnancy update that I had mapped my birth. There was a few things that were maybe going to look a little bit different because baby was breech from 34 weeks, which I was then planning to have a vaginal breech birth, which is a whole episode in itself, because having a vaginal breech birth is definitely the 1% of breech birth. So anyway, that's a whole story in itself. So yes, in this episode, I am taking you through how my third trimester unfolded, what happened. I'm taking you through a bit of a mismatch with my due dates, which means that I actually don't know exactly what gestation I was when I birthed, but I'm fairly confident I was around 41 weeks. And yeah, I'll take you through how incredible the woman body is and how powerful we are as women, and what a humbling experience this was for me, I think. I hope you enjoyed this episode. It's definitely a really good exercise to record your birth, and I really like doing it. It was really amazing to be able to share that with you guys. And so without further ado, I'll leave you to listen to this birth story of mine, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. You are listening to Kappa with a Doula. I'm your host, Alicia, exercise physiologist and doula. And every week I chat with a mom or mom-to-be about all things pregnancy, birth, and parenting. The stories you will hear in this podcast are real and sometimes raw, but they are all told without any taboo. So grab yourself a cuppa, put your earphones in, relax, and enjoy this episode. Hello and welcome back to the podcast. Today I have a little helper. So the very last time I recorded, I was pregnant with this one who is now on my chest. So if you hear some baby noises, that's definitely her. So hopefully I can record this episode all in one go. I am back today to give you an update on how my third trimester went, and then tell you about the incredible birth story of this little one arriving into the world, actually. So stay tuned. You will definitely want to hear that one. I think I left you guys on my second trimester update, which I had just changed hospitals. So I was originally going to birth at a Queensland hospital, and then because of our caravanning and full-time traveling, we actually decided to birth in New South Wales because it was easier for us to manage, because that's actually where we were heading down. In the second trimester, I actually met one of the midwife that was going to potentially be there at my birth. We did all the intake forms, we did all the intake tests and all of that. And I think that's pretty much where I left you guys. So just as a bit of a reminder, in case you haven't listened to my first or second trimester updates. So I was going through, it's not a midwifery group practice program. It was sort of like that, but instead of having your own assigned midwife, I had a group of midwives that one of them would potentially be at my birth, but I just didn't know who would be there, obviously. So that's the type of model of care I was going through. So that's through a public hospital in New South Wales. And after the birth, you would have a midwife coming to your home to do some checks on both you and baby for about 5 days. So this is where we were up to. So my third trimester went pretty good, actually. We were traveling. We traveled up until I was 37 weeks. And then at 37 weeks, we decided to be stationary, settled near the hospital I was going to birth at, just in case. I was pretty confident I would birth after or around 40 weeks. So yeah, I was pretty confident with that. But anyway, we thought, well, you can never be too sure, right? Pretty much up until 37 weeks, I was really active. We did a lot of hiking. We did a lot of walks. We went to the Warrumbungles. I don't know if you guys know the Warrumbungles National Park in New South Wales. We did an incredible walk there with 300 steps. It was absolutely amazing. We went to the Blue Mountains National Park as well. We did an incredible walk there. That was so good. So no complication, no problems. Felt really good. Didn't actually have, I think in the second trimester, I was telling you guys I had a bit of back pain and a bit of hip pain. And as soon as I started exercising again on a regular basis and walking or doing hikes like we did, that all went away. It was so good. So I felt really strong. I didn't have aches. Even I had some reflux, even that went down actually in the third trimester, which was kind of a surprise because I thought I had it in the second trimester. I thought it would keep on going, obviously, as I got bigger. So I actually felt really good in the third trimester. The only thing is, as we got to 37 weeks on, I started feeling a lot more tired. So I would actually need to rest over an afternoon, or I would sleep in over morning. So there was a bit of tiredness there for obvious reasons. But overall, it was really good. And then came the wait. So the wait was actually, it was quite long because even though I kind of anticipated that baby wouldn't come until about 40 weeks or around my due date. I think from 37 weeks on, I was kind of like, it could be. But at the same time, because we didn't know at the time that she was a girl. So when I say she, we actually had no idea that she was a girl. We didn't find out the gender until birth. But we knew that she had been measured on scans as a smaller baby, not smaller in terms of like worryingly small, but she was measuring on the smaller side of the scale. Again, knowing that scans can be quite inaccurate, and we'll get back to that later. So therefore, I didn't want her until closer to 39 weeks, just so she would grow a bit bigger and so on, right? So I think mentally, I manifested her not coming before 39 weeks at least. And she didn't. So that was good. That was good. I was quite happy with that. So what happened? We had a midwife's appointment at 37 weeks and everything was fine. We had, the next one was at 30. No, so I think what it was, we had a midwife appointment at 37 weeks, and then my next midwife appointment would be after my due date. And I don't know if I told you guys in the second trimester, but there was a lot of problems around my due date. So whenever I would go for a scan and they would estimate my due date, they would always come up with a different date. So therefore, this whole pregnancy, I actually went by the due date of my latest scan, which was my morphology scan. So I went by this date, but somehow the hospital had a different date. So they had a date that was 4 days after the one that I went by. So that was a bit of juggling there, because whenever I had a midwife appointment, I would know how many weeks and days along I am, but then I would have to take away 4 days because that's what the hospital had me by. The only reason why I kind of didn't fight it and I didn't really care was because the hospital's due date was after the one I thought. It actually bought me 4 days. So it was good in the sense that if she came after her due date, well, for the hospital, they kind of wouldn't be bothering me until 4 days later. So that was kind of good in that sense. And that's the only reason why I didn't fight it. And I didn't say, look, you're so wrong, this is the actual due date. So that was a bit of juggling there, because I'm not 100% sure what gestation she came out, but I think I know, and I'll tell you guys later what gestation she actually came out. But yeah, it was very annoying to have to do calculations and go, okay, well, I think I am this gestation, but the hospital knows me as this gestation. So that was a bit of juggling there, but anyway, we got there. To get to the birth, actually, so everything was going really good. I actually, according to my due date, we went past her due date and nothing happened. So that was good. Actually, sorry, I need to take a step back. At 37 weeks and 2 days, I think, I woke up through the night and I think I thought there were contractions, but they didn't really feel like full-on contractions. So I had been having Braxton Hicks through the day, like pretty much. I had them very regularly in the third trimester, but they were never progressing, so that wasn't concerning. And then I think from 37 weeks on, I had them most days, if not every day. But again, they were not progressing to anything. They were actually not working on my cervix, so it wasn't. And from 37 weeks on, obviously that's not a concern anymore. So I had been having them through the day, whether I was doing something or I was resting. I'd just have Braxton Hicks, which was fine. And so one night I was 37 plus 2, and I woke up in the middle of the night. It's about 1 or 2 in the morning, and I'm having it was kind of like in between a Braxton Hicks and contractions. So it was kind of a bit more intense than Braxton Hicks, but not as intense as what I remembered contractions to be, right? And so I think I started panicking because I didn't feel I was ready. So even though you can never be like 100% ready for the birth of your baby, I feel, I wasn't ready because I hadn't packed my hospital bag. So we had an emergency hospital bag packed in the car just in case. Had been since about 35 weeks or something, but it didn't have absolutely everything. There would still be things to add, like, your toothbrush, your hairbrush, and then all the little things I wanted to use in birth, like all my little birth prompts. Like, I had a squeeze ball. I wanted to have a playlist ready with my hypnobirthing tracks. I wanted to have speakers ready to take into hospital. I wanted an eye mask to kind of block out any outside world, really. So all of that wasn't ready. And so therefore I started panicking, because I thought, oh, I'm going into labor and I don't have my birth prompts ready. I haven't even finished packing my hospital bag. This is not good. I can't be birthing. And so therefore I started getting like the shakes. Like, I started shaking my whole body and I couldn't stop. And it wasn't really that I was cold. I didn't feel cold, but like, I just got the shakes. And then that went on for, maybe it wasn't that long. Maybe it wasn't 10 minutes. I'm not exactly sure. Obviously, it's kind of like in birthright, time is a concept at this point, really. So yeah, it just went on for maybe 10 minutes, and then I managed to get back to sleep. And then I slept and woke up in the morning and went, oh, okay, well, it's all good. I obviously didn't go into labor. So yeah, it was very strange. I had never experienced that before. So I don't know if it was like, I don't think I was going into labor. Maybe it was just some stronger Braxton Hicks. But then I started panicking, and I think from there on, things went definitely downhill. So a lot of, when I prepared for this birth, I had to work through a lot of fears, actually, which was quite interesting, because for my first birth, I wasn't fearing birth, and I think it was mostly because I didn't know really what to expect. I mean, you can read about childbirth, you can watch it, and you can, listen to people telling you about their experience, but until you've experienced it, to me, it was all abstract. Like, I had the concepts, I understood the concepts back then, but I couldn't say, oh, okay, yes, I definitely see how it's going to go. Obviously, every birth is different. So I think the first time I had this advantage of not knowing what to expect. And so therefore, I was like, okay, well, I'm really open-minded, and I have resources in my toolbox. I will just be able to deal with it. That will be fine. And I think the second time around, because I knew what my first birth was like, I was really fearful, right? And in my first birth, if you haven't listened to that episode, go back to episode 23, where I take you through my first pregnancy, my first and second pregnancy, because I had a miscarriage. And then I take you through the birth of my first daughter, and you will hear that in the later stage of, in the second stage of labor, so before pushing but well into it, I started panicking a lot, and it kind of also maybe dragged on, and at some point I kind of felt like things were slowing down. And anyway, there was a big sense of panic with, the adrenaline pumping through my body, which obviously wasn't good for my oxytocin and so on. I still managed to have a physiological, drug-free hospital birth, but it definitely came with a lot of pain and a lot of panic and adrenaline. So knowing that, when it came to this birth, I definitely didn't want to panic, in as much as I could. I wanted to be working through those fears, obviously, before the birth, and then take the birth as it is, and know what it was like the first time, keeping an open mind, knowing that things can obviously go differently, but knowing kind of how it was, and then going, okay, I can do it without panicking, because there is no need to panic. So I worked a lot through that, and I read a lot of books about hypnobirthing. I had done a hypnobirthing course with my first, and then I found some hypnobirthing tracks as well that I listened to before the birth, which was really useful, and that's something you should do. If you've got hypnobirthing tracks, definitely get familiar with them before the birth, so that during the birth, you know exactly what they're telling you. You can relate to the affirmations. You can, everything you've practiced will be just second nature at that point, and that's exactly what you want. So I found some hypnobirthing tracks that really resonated with me, that I could really anchor myself to and remind myself that it was going to be fine. There was no need to be fearful, and just, even though I knew the physiology of birth, I had to work through, I had to read again about, the physiology of birth, especially in regards to hormones, because that talks to me a lot, and just go, that's right, if I start panicking, I'm going to produce adrenaline, which is exactly what happened the first time around. And I remembered how I felt and the pain I experienced and so on. And so obviously I had this as a please don't do it again type of example, basically. So 37 weeks went past, 38 weeks went past, 39 weeks went past, and then 40 weeks. So it came the due date, and as I said, I was getting a lot of Braxton Hicks, especially getting closer to 40 weeks. I was getting Braxton Hicks every day. They were just not progressing. Like, not at all. I could feel that I would get those, and maybe sometimes I would just get one or two, and sometimes I would get them for 5 or 10 minutes, but they were not working on my cervix. I could feel that they were not going anywhere. So I would just let my body do its thing. By the time we got to 39 and 40 weeks, I had all my birth prompts in a drawer where it was easy for me to reach for them, whatever time of the day it was. Sorry, I should take you through how I planned on birthing, knowing that we live in a caravan. So the plan for this birth was just like with my first daughter. The plan was to stay at home being the caravan, for as long as possible, and to labor there until I felt that it was the right time to go to hospital, because I wanted a physiological, drug-free, no intervention hospital birth. So even though there was the involvement of the hospital, because I would go there, I didn't want them to do anything. I just wanted to birth there because to me that was a safe-ish place. And also, obviously, because the first time around we didn't have a child for my first birth. This time around we had a toddler. So the plan was that my partner, as soon as I experienced my first real contraction, basically he would drop our toddler off to his mom, and so therefore she would be cared for, she would be fine, and she wouldn't be in the caravan. And when it was time for us to go to the hospital, we could just go. We wouldn't have to then drop her off and so on, right? So that was a good plan. Coming back to my drawer, so then I packed all my prompts, so my eye mask, my squeezy ball, I had my earbuds within reach, and I think that was about it. I had a comb as well. All of that was within easy reach in a drawer that was easy for me to access, whatever time of the day it was, on the top. Everything was together, and we had by that time finalized the hospital bag. So we had everything ready. So the hospital bag was in the car. Pretty much all you had to do was just, like put ourselves in the car and drive. There you go. That was it. So that was pretty straightforward. So 39 weeks went by, 40 weeks went by, and then we got to, so again, coming back to my due date being an absolute mystery. So according to my due date, which is what I went by, because I felt that I knew when conception happened, pretty much to a day or two. I knew, obviously, so I knew conception, I knew the day of my last menstruation. So according to that, I was pretty confident that I knew the due date, and especially because it was confirmed by the morphology scan. So there you go. So according to that, I had my due date sorted. The hospital's due date was wrong as far as I was concerned, and that was fine. They could just keep whatever number makes them happy. So according to my due date, I was 40 plus 6. So with my first daughter, she was born at 40 plus 3 after I had a stretch and sweep at 40 plus 1. Now, the beautiful thing about this is I will never know if I went into labor spontaneously or whether the stretch and sweep sort of helped. I mean, it was almost 48 hours later, but who knows, right? So this time around at 40 plus 6, according to my due date, nothing was happening. So I was happy to go closer to 42 weeks. That was fine by me. And especially, again, knowing that on scans, we had been told that our baby was on the smaller side. So to me, the longer she stayed in, the better it was, really. And I was feeling quite good. So I didn't mind going to 42 weeks. I didn't have fears around going past my due date. So that was fine. The hospital had booked a post due date appointment, which to them would have happened when I was 41 weeks. But by that point, I would have actually been 41 plus 4. So I would have been well onto my way to give birth at any point. But I was really confident that I wouldn't make that appointment. I was really confident I wouldn't be pregnant by then. I didn't think I would get to 41 weeks. So 40 plus 6 came by, and that day was going good. And then I kind of went, it's been a bit since I've felt movements, right? And obviously at 40 plus 6 and the hospital thinking I was 40 plus 2, that was starting to be concerning. So I didn't really want to go to hospital to get checked out, only because I knew they would start talking about induction. I knew at this point, if I presented with reduced fetal movement, they would just give me the induction talk and then either try and bully me into accepting it or really push it, and I didn't want to fight for it because I didn't want to be induced. That was definitely, unless there was an absolute reason for it, a medical reason that my baby's health was at risk, I didn't want to be induced. So I still decided to go to the hospital because I reminded myself that even if the hospital starts talking about, oh, you need to have an induction because you're 40 plus 2 and you've got reduced fetal movement and that could be dangerous, I can still say no. I have this power to say, no, I do not want an induction. Thank you for offering it, but I'm declining it. So I reminded myself that whatever they say, I will just look at the facts. The facts being, how is my baby's health? How's the heartbeat? How's the fluid level? Is there an actual indication that something is maybe, not going well to warrant an induction? And if not, then we don't need an induction. But if there are signs, then, analyze those and kind of see how it is. The other thing I forgot to mention is I had a student midwife following me. And so she was really good because I didn't have a midwife assigned to me. I didn't have, a point of reference. I had her, the student midwife. And she was really good because I could just contact her and say, oh, I'm worried about this, or, what is a lot of questions I asked her were actually about the hospital. So it was about, what is the hospital stand on this? What is the hospital's policy if this happens? So that I could kind of get a feel for what the hospital was like. And that was actually really good. So if you're thinking about getting a student midwife, or if you're pregnant right now and you haven't got one, then definitely look into it. I did an episode with a student midwife, Kirsten. So have a listen to that on Cuppa with a Pro. That's episode number 2. And she takes us through what is a student midwife. And then in the show notes of that episode, I have put links to Facebook pages where you can find student midwives. So you can post on those Facebook groups and you can say, hi, I am birthing at this hospital in, either you give the date or the month. Is there a student midwife that would like to follow me? And you can, and then they can reach out to you and you can meet with them, chat with them, and so on, right? So the really good thing about having a student midwife for me was she was my point of contact should I have any questions. And she was a really good point of contact for me to get to know the hospital, because I found that, like, obviously you can ask midwives, how's the hospital policy on this and that, but because they work there, I feel like sometimes they kind of they don't tell you the full extent of it, I feel. So they kind of play it down a bit. And then when, for example, you go past your due date, that's when you actually realize what the hospital policy is on going past your due date, for example. So I found that with my student midwife, she was really honest on that, and because she wasn't yet working there as a midwife. So that was really good for me to get a feel of what barriers or what conversations I was potentially going to face based on the circumstances, right? So, for example, one of the things I had learned through my student midwife was that I wanted, after my birth, I wanted to have a physiological third stage. I didn't want the injection. I wanted to have time given to me, start feeding my baby, and then see if I could get some contraction and expel the placenta by myself, basically. And she had told me that the hospital that I was planning to birth at had a very low tolerance for blood loss. So basically, as soon as they decided that you were bleeding just a bit too much, they would just give you the injection, basically, which again, they can't give you the injection. You have to consent to it. If they give you an injection without first asking, can I inject you with this syntocin? That is not what should happen, and that's not good practice. So when I say, oh, they would give you the injection, is they would maybe try and really push the injection and really get you to agree to it. They definitely should not inject you without you knowing what's happening and why you're doing that. So I knew that. And so therefore, in my birth preparation, I was prepared for this kind of conversation. And I knew in the back of my head that after baby was born, I would probably need to say, no, I do not want the syntocin. Please give me time to expel the placenta naturally. I will try and feed my baby, and then that will probably bring on contractions, and I will try and do it by myself. But give me the time and the space to do it. And also, because that's one thing for you to prepare for that, I had also prepared my partner for it. So I had told him that if he saw, for example, that the midwife was preparing something that might look like an injection, to say, oh, no, that's not what she wants. And that if, for example, I forgot to mention it, then he would mention that, I wanted a physiological third stage. So always get your birth partner up to date with your wishes and how you wish things to proceed, obviously based on scenarios, right? So just like there is an episode that will come out at some point with Catherine Bell from the Birth Map, and basically what she talks about is, instead of having a birth plan, it's mapping your birth, which is, it's going beyond the birth plan, because now you're exploring different scenarios, and you're before birth, you're thinking about what you would do in each scenario. And this is something that Jason and I prepared for, and we mapped basically our birth that way. And we said, well, in this circumstance where everything is looking fine, I am fine, baby is fine, then this is what I want. However, if, for example, I am unwell or baby's unwell, this is what we want to do. So we had a map, we had different scenarios, and we had preferences for pretty much each of them, right? Speaking of birth plan, I had also written my birth plan according to according to a format that makes sense to the hospital. So they had given me basically a form to fill out about my birth plan, and I had that filled out. I had discussed it with the midwife at my previous appointment, and that was in my hospital bag to go into hospital with us. And I mean, the really big difference between a birth plan and a birth map is that on the birth plan, it's pretty much assuming that everything goes right. This is what I want. And there's not really any space for, if this happens, then I would like to do this. There's not really much plan there. So it's kind of a bit, I like to see a birth plan as, it's kind of like a 2D, like a 2 dimension. It's not really taking the full picture, being your birth map, which is more 3 dimensions. So it's really encompassing, the whole environment, the whole circumstances, your health, baby's health, obviously your partner's as well, Yeah. So to me, the birth plan, I had one written because, that's kind of what the hospital expected. So I did it in the format that would make sense to them. But with Jason, we had completely mapped out scenarios. So he would know, for example, if I became unconscious, unresponsive, wasn't able to obviously express my wishes, he would know what I wanted at that point based on the circumstances of what's happening. He would know. So therefore, that's where birth partner is really, really important. And it's really important that you keep that communication going. And also during the birth, they play a super important role in terms of how do you want them to support you? What do you want them to do while you're in labor, or, during this stage? So during, pre-labor, what do you want them to be doing for you? During labor, during pushing phase, what do you want them to be actually doing to help you, really? Because in my case, when I'm thinking of a physiological birth, I know that I will need help. I know that it's really hard. From my first birth, I didn't find birth extremely easy. I know some people do. I didn't. So I definitely wanted Jason's help to help me, but also to keep me grounded, to keep me anchored, because that was one thing I found during my first birth. I lost my zone, I lost my anchor, and everything became a lot more complicated at that point. So the first thing I needed him to do was to remind me of my affirmations and keep me anchored, keep me in my zone, so that I could at least manage contractions, and I could not try to fight them. I would let the contractions be, not actually go against them. So sorry, that was a bit of a diversion there, but so coming back to 40+6, I presented to hospital with reduced fetal movement because I hadn't felt baby very much. It was unusual for her. So I decided that even though I was really confident that the hospital would start talking about an induction back then, I was really confident that I was very strong. And unless there was a medical reason, I would decline it. Obviously, I wouldn't be rude in declining it. I would just say, thank you for presenting me my options. I decline this at this moment. If things change, or if I change my mind, I have your phone number. I can call birthing suite and, schedule an induction. So I went in and we got a CTG done. Everything was fine, but because according to the hospital, I was 40+2, they wanted to check my fluid level, which I knew notoriously in the third trimester getting scans done and also checking your fluid level can be highly inaccurate. So what I had done, because I had discussed it with my student midwife, is that there had been studies to show that if you're very well hydrated, you can actually influence your amniotic fluid level. So I had made sure that I was really, really, really well hydrated on that day, just in case, because even though it can make a minor difference, it's not going to increase your fluid levels by, a liter, but it can bring it up to a level, if you've got a threshold and you're just below it, then they say you've got low fluid levels. Whereas if you're just above it, then you've got normal fluid levels. So I had made sure I was really well hydrated so that if it came to that, maybe that would make a difference in terms of me being just on the cusp of being, of having low fluid levels, and it would maybe bring me up to normal fluid level. So this is a little trick, in case you might be in this situation too. So the obstetrician came and she checked my fluid level. She did an ultrasound, which I was really happy about because I kind of wanted to check that baby was moving indeed. I mean, we had just heard the heartbeat through the CTG, so it was reassuring. But I think I wanted to see baby move for myself. It was more for me, not for anyone else. So she moved, and my fluid levels were actually good. So I was really surprised because obviously I was 40+6 at that point, which is when your fluid levels can actually look like they are on the lower side of normal, maybe. And again, normal is a spectrum, right? So yeah, what that means is unknown to me. But she still recommended, so even though the CTG was showing that everything was all good, baby was moving, and my fluid levels were fine, she still recommended an induction. Well, haha, surprise, right? I was not expecting that at all. So she recommended an induction because she said, well, you're 40+2, you're presenting with reduced fetal movement. Yeah, I'm recommending this. So I said, well, thank you for everything, but no, I'm declining. And I was really confident in declining because everything looked fine. I wasn't concerned anymore. So yeah, so basically from there on, I went home. Oh, sorry, I should say. So the hospital had me at 40 plus 2, but I was 40 plus 6. And at this point, obviously, I was nearing 41 weeks. I wasn't sure what was happening to me. I hadn't lost my mucus plug, which happened in my first birth. I lost my mucus plug at 37, 38, and 39 weeks. Like whether it regenerated or it was bits of it, I'm not even sure. But I lost my mucus plug 3 times before my daughter was born at 40 plus 3. So with this one, I hadn't lost my mucus plug. So I thought, well, if I haven't lost it, either I haven't seen it, maybe I've missed it, maybe I have lost it and I just don't know about it, or it means that my cervix is not dilating, which means my baby's not in the right position yet. I don't know if you guys remember, but my baby was actually breech. So I think I posted on Instagram that at 34 weeks, baby was actually breech. We went for a Grove scan, which again, Grove scan in the 3rd trimester, you got to be really careful because they can be highly inaccurate. The only reason why I decided to go with a Grove scan, it was for my own reassurance. It was because I felt I needed to check that she was growing from the morphology scan because she had been labeled as a smaller baby, not worryingly small, but smaller baby. So therefore, and that was different to my first pregnancy where my first daughter was tracking really well. There was no concern. She was tracking between the pretty much the 60th and the 80th percentile the whole time. So there was never any concern about her weight and her size. She was never too big, but she was never too small either. So it was perfect. Whereas with this one, pretty much from the get-go, she was labeled as a smaller baby, but not worryingly small. And so therefore, to me, that was concerning. To Jason, that was also concerning. So we wanted to get a growth scan just to check for us where her growth was and whether she had actually been growing. So we did that at 34 weeks. And we found out that she was breech. And that was a total surprise because I had no idea that she was breech. So at the morphology scan, she wasn't. And then I think what happened is I think maybe a few days, so maybe 2 or so days before that growth scan, I felt a really big movement. And I think that might have been her moving into a breech position. But at the time, I didn't know that. I thought she moved in a very different way to usual. And yeah, so at 34 weeks we found out she was breech, which was concerning. And sorry, it wasn't concerning, but it looked like it could change our birth plan. So from that time I actually did a lot of research about birthing a breech baby. My plan was that if at 37 weeks she was still breech, it was to transfer hospitals again and go to a higher category hospital to then try to have a vaginal breech birth at a hospital under the care of an obstetrician, which the obstetrician part of it is definitely something I didn't want. I didn't want an obstetrician involved, but that was, if you wanted a vaginal breech birth, you had to be under the care of an obstetrician. So I had done a lot of research. I had listened to a lot of podcasts as well. So I was really confident that I had the arguments to pretty much convince the obstetrician that I was a good candidate for a vaginal breech birth. And also, just again, I try and say it during every single one of my podcast episodes, you can say no to anything. So even if it had come to that and the obstetrician said, no, I don't think you should have a vaginal breech birth because of these reasons, you can say, well, thank you, but I disagree with you and we are not doing this and this and that. You can decline anything. They cannot induce you without your consent. They cannot do a C-section without your consent. You have to consent to every procedures. You have to consent to it all. And they cannot do anything without that. So the power is always in your hands. They can try and convince you. They can try and almost, I would say, bully you into doing things. But at the end of the day, it is your decision and you can say no to anything. And if you do, they can't do anything about it. So always remember that, because when I was going through, oh, am I going to have a breech birth? How is that going to look? When you look at hospital statistics and even overall statistics, when I looked at that in terms of a vaginal breech birth, it's only 1% of vaginal breech birth that actually happen, whereas 99% of breech babies are born via a C-section. So really, when I was looking at this, I was thinking, wow, that's going to be a really hard battle, because if I'm in the 1%, that is really hard to then find the obstetrician that will actually support that and be happy and not want to pull the pin as soon as something is looking different. My student midwife was so good. She would always say that whatever the circumstances were, she would always say, oh, it's a variation of normal. And so I kept on going, yeah, that's right, because normal it's a spectrum, right? So what is normal, really? Like, if you think about it, what is normal? Normal means something different to everyone. As long as the clinical signs are showing that baby is healthy, baby is not in distress, you're healthy, you're not in any distress, there is no indication that something is wrong, then everything is normal then. So, she was saying, well, a breech birth is a variation of normal. And I thought, well, yeah, exactly. So why is it that 99% of women have a C-section then? Because definitely I didn't want to have a C-section if my baby was breech. So anyway, at 36 weeks, baby turned around somewhere between 34 and 36 weeks. For anyone who's listening who has a breech baby, who's wondering how that happened, I could not tell you how, but I will tell you that what I did, being in a caravan, I didn't have a Swiss ball. So I didn't have an exercise ball, which was such a shame because I loved my exercise ball with my first pregnancy. So that's point of call number one to help flip a baby, is to sit on the ball and do a lot of figure eights and lots of circles, moving the hips and so on. I didn't have that. So I couldn't use my exercise ball. So a lot of the things I did was I tried to be conscious when I was sitting to not have my pelvis posteriorly tilted, because that's encouraging baby to stay in the position they're in. Also, I try not to sit for too long. So at least every hour I would try and get up. You can look on, there's a website called Spinning Babies, which gives you a little bit of cues about what to do around spinning a baby out of a breech position. The thing to remember though, and that's again something my student midwife told me, is baby will be born the way he or she needs to. So, it's sometimes you can't spin a breech baby because that is the way that they're meant to be born. And I actually believe in that. So I didn't overly push the spinning baby as such. What I did was I tried to not sit down for too long, because that's actually not really good for you anyway. You should get up every hour. Spinning babies recommend doing inversions, which personally make me feel really dizzy. So I couldn't do it because it wasn't safe for me to do so. So therefore I think I tried maybe a few to really say that I tried, but it wasn't safe for me to do so. So I couldn't do inversions. And then the other thing I did was walking. So I did a lot of walking to make sure that my hips were staying mobile, which was also going to help in labor as well, because you need your hips and you need your pelvis to be able to open up and to have a fair bit of freedom of movement, so that your sacrum can move, your hips can expand and so on. So I made sure that I was walking and I was basically staying active, so that during labor, whatever position my baby was in, I had mobility. I had joint mobility there to accommodate for whatever way baby was going to born. So came 36 weeks, baby had flipped anyway. So I was back onto a vaginal birth, physiological, drug-free at the hospital with my student midwife present at the birth. So after I presented to hospital, and they said, so they checked me, they did the CTG, they checked the fluid level, they checked baby's movement, everything was fine. and I declined an induction, I decided, because I was actually 40 plus 6 and I wasn't sure that things were happening. So inside of me, I was starting to lose confidence that labor was going to start on its own, right? And I was starting to feel like I was going to go to that post-dates appointment. I was starting to doubt myself. I was starting to doubt my body's ability to actually go into labor. So there was a lot of that negative self-talk. And I remembered that I had the same with my first birth. And the thing that really helped was a stretch and sweep, only because it gave me a number. So it gave me a dilation number so that I could go, oh, okay, my body's been working. I just haven't felt it. I didn't know about it, but my body has been working. It has been doing things. So therefore, I can fully trust it that it will go into labor whenever the time is right. So I said, well, can I get a stretch and sweep done? And obviously they're really happy to do that because they probably love interventions in the hospital. So I got a stretch and sweep done, and the midwife said, oh, I can stretch you to 4 centimeters. And then I said, oh, what's baby's head position? Because I knew that her head was down, but I wasn't sure whether she was facing posterior or whether she was facing anterior. And again, those were informations that I felt I needed to reassure me that everything was looking fine, even though, babies can be born facing posteriorly, and that's fine. I just wanted to know what position she was in, what, potential variation of normal, so that I could visualize it. I did a lot of visualization again this pregnancy, so I could visualize it and I could reassure myself that everything was fine, everything was looking good. Physiologically, my baby was in this position. Physiologically, my cervix was, this many centimeters dilated and so on, right? So to me, that helped for those reasons. It might not help you. You might not want to stretch and sweep. But for me, I didn't want interventions, but I was happy to have a stretch and sweep because it was helping my mindset. And we know that mindset is everything in labor because it's a mental game. So you need to have your mindset right from the get-go so that you can fully surrender, fully trust your body and go with the flow, really. So this is why I got a stretch and sweep. She said she couldn't tell baby's head position because baby was moving actually inside the pelvis. But she said that she could stretch me to 4 centimeters. So my cervix was it was definitely starting to dilate. There was definitely things happening there. Again, I just didn't know about it. So therefore I went home really reassured because I had heard the heartbeat. I had seen the fluid level. Everything was fine. I had seen baby move, and I knew that now my cervix was dilated a little bit. So I was really confident. So now I was really happy, and I was ready to go to 42 weeks easily, right? So came that night, actually. So I was 40 plus 6 at that point. So came that night, and and that's the very funny part, actually. I went to bed and everything was fine. I didn't have any more Braxton Hicks, any more than normal, at least. I went to bed. I had no indication of anything happening. So I woke up, and anytime I'd woken up in the days leading up to birth, every time I woke up, I checked the time because I don't know why. I always wanted to know if I went into labor, I wanted to know the exact time of labor starting. And funnily enough, that night, I didn't check the time. So I kind of glanced at the clock, but I didn't really pay attention to the numbers. So I know that it was 11, but I just don't know the minutes. So I think what happened is I woke up and I went to the toilet, and then I checked the clock, and I think it said 11:15, right? And then I went back to bed. There didn't seem to be, I wasn't sure if I was experiencing contractions or if it was Braxton Hicks again. It didn't feel very strong. So I went back to bed. I laid down, and that night, so all the weeks before that day, it had been sunny, really hot. We had really hot days. It went up to 38, 39 degrees. It was really lovely when you're in your third trimester and you're very pregnant to have days that are this hot. But anyway, I managed just fine. And so that night we have a window above our bed, and even when the curtain is pulled close, you can still see around it. So in the morning you can see a bit of light come in, if that makes sense. And so I remember that night after I'd gotten up, went to the toilet, went back to bed, I was laying and I was looking at that window and I saw a bit of lightning, and then I heard thunder, a few seconds later, and I went, oh no, there is a storm coming and it's definitely happening tonight. And I kid you not, I had my first contraction then. It was like I'd asked for it, really. So it started raining. There was thunderstorm outside, and there was lightning, right? And I had my first contraction. So I went, okay, maybe that's not it. And then I had a second one, and I think I was timing them, and I went, oh yeah, no, that's definitely it. So after maybe 3 or 4, I just went, yeah, that's definitely contractions. That is it. That is it. So I woke Jason up. So it's about 11:20 or 11:30 at that point. I wake him up and I go, yep, I think we're on. And he goes, okay. So then we get the toddler up. Pretty much within 3 minutes, it's, her bag in the car, her in the car, and he drives off. And then, because I didn't want to panic, I reassured myself that everything was going to be fine. It was all going to be okay. So I grabbed my eye mask, I grabbed my earbuds, I put on my hypnobirthing track, and then I go, yep, this is happening. I'm going to meet my baby. Everything's going to be fine. So one of my biggest fear as well was, because I knew Jason had to go to his mum to drop our toddler off, it was, how am I going to handle working through labor knowing that he's not here? Somehow I felt like when he was gone, I would panic and I wouldn't be able to do anything. And so I had to really reassure myself. Again, it's a mind game. So a lot of it was reassurance and keeping myself grounded with that hypnobirthing track and going, yep, it's all fine. He's going to be back any minute now, which he was. I think he wasn't gone very long. Time in labor is this concept that's very fluid. It's definitely, I have no idea how long he was gone for, but anyway. So yeah, it was all fine. And then he came back pretty much. I think he was only gone for 10 minutes. It felt longer, but I managed just fine. So the contractions were, from the get-go, they were regular and they were quite intense. So obviously I had experienced contractions before. I knew what they were. And I remembered that usually with my first pregnancy, at least, how I felt them is that I would feel them come on, I would feel the peak of the contraction, and then I would feel the contraction kind of fade away. And this time around, it was so different. So I would feel the contraction come on, but it wasn't as clear as what I had experienced the first time around. And there was something strange about my contraction. I couldn't really figure out what it was. And obviously I'm trying not to overanalyze my contraction while I'm having them, because I need to just, not use my thinking brain. I need to just surrender, relax, not work against my body. So if I start to think and analyze, that's counterintuitive. But I realized later down the track that I was having basically double contractions. So I was having 2 contractions back to back. So therefore, when I felt them come on, I didn't feel the peak, because it was pretty much, the intensity would lower a little bit, and then there'd be another one. So it'd almost be like the second contractions was building on the first one, if that makes sense. So it was extremely, extremely intense. And it was, I don't think I was expecting it. So it was really hard for me to stay grounded, because that's not what I was expecting. And so at this point, I'm basically feeling double the contractions. I'm trying, and they're coming on probably every minute, if not 2 minutes, and they're very, very intense every time. And I'm trying not to fight my body. I'm trying to go with it, but wow, it's really difficult. So I'm still, at this point, we're still in the caravan. I'm working through it, and I'm on the bed. So I'm on our bed, which, for the little detail, has a white doona on. Okay, if you can kind of imagine where I'm going with this looks like a disaster at this point, right? Because my waters have not broken. So I'm working through my contractions. I'm trying not to think, not to overanalyze everything, but all I am thinking about is the fact that we have a white doona on. My waters have not broken yet, and I do not want my doona to be soaked, right? Because it's hard enough to do washing when you live in a caravan, let alone when you're trying to wash a doona and then you're trying to dry it, right? So the last thing I want is for that to be, soaked. And we don't have puppy pads, we don't have any of that, right? We've got towels, but that's still going to soak the doona. So at some point, I am really feeling that I need to push. So I'm in the caravan, and he's been seeing how I'm going, and he's been seeing, I think he's so that, something changed, probably in my breathing or in the sounds I was making. And he's thinking, okay, we need to get to the hospital. We need to get into the car. And it's pretty much at this point that he says, okay, maybe we'll try and get into the car. And pretty much as he says those words, I feel this baby descend, and I feel the need to push. And I always said to Jason, if I feel the need to push, we cannot get in the car because it's a 40 to 45-minute drive. And if I have the urge to push before we leave, it's really dangerous because the roads that we would have taken, for one, it's at night, they're not lit, and they're country roads. So if you have to give your location maybe to the ambulance, it'd be really hard because you'd be in the middle of nowhere trying to find any indication to get the ambulance to locate you, and then you're on the side of the road, which is extremely dangerous, and so on, right? So at this point, I get the urge to push. And so I think to myself, oh, we're not getting in the car. So I say that to Jason, but obviously when I'm in labor, it's really hard for me to form long sentences that say, we cannot get in the car because I have this urge to push. And I don't know if you remember, a few weeks ago, I told you that if I have the urge to push, it's really dangerous to get into the car. Obviously, I can't vocalize that. So I say, no, we're not getting in the car. And then he's thinking, oh, she's just being dramatic, she's in too much pain. She thinks she can't get into the car, blah, blah, blah. And then I go, and then I don't think I ever said that I needed to push, but he heard the sounds and he went, oh, and then he's realizing that we're not going to make it to hospital. We will not make it because we cannot get in the car. And so at this point, after asking me, Jason calls the ambulance. So he's on the phone to 000. And I think between him calling the ambulance, and so between him realizing that, he needs to call the ambulance and actually calling the ambulance, I think I had just basically dropped to the floor. So I was on the bed, and I think I slid down the bed somehow in a way that wouldn't hurt me, but kind of quickly. And so I dropped myself. So I'm now on the floor of the caravan. I'm basically with my head under the bed, and Jason's on the phone to 000. And the lady can hear me in the background, and she's thinking, oh, probably what is this? Because you can hear me kind of scream. And then Jason explains the situation. And so the lady is thinking, oh, okay, yes, that's fine. So she asked the questions like, have the waters been broken, which at that point they hadn't been. So the lady's probably thinking, oh, well, that's okay. We can probably wait. It might be that, the ambulance can get there before, or maybe you can be taken by the ambulance to the hospital. And so she asked the question, have the waters been broken? Jason says no. And then within 20 seconds of him saying, no, my waters break, on the floor of the caravan, not on my white doona, which I was so relieved about. And from there on, basically, the head is visible, and there is definitely no going to hospital at this point. So Jason's pretty much got 000 on the phone, and he is, the whole time he kept 000 on the phone, not on speakers, for the simple reason that he didn't want me to hear what she was saying, the operating woman, because he didn't want me to panic if she said anything that could basically send me into panic. So he kept the phone to his ear, and he was answering every question. And the lady said that, the ambulance was on its way, and she would give him the estimated time of arrival and so on. But I think she said, don't push, which obviously, how do you not push when you have the urge to push, right? And as if you can hold the baby in, right? And so at this point, I had told Jason what to do if baby came, and we were without medical assistance. So basically, I had told him we need towels, and it's not about the floor of the caravan, it's about keeping the baby warm when he or she is born. So we needed towels, we needed to not touch the cord, and that was it. And then it was basically, don't do anything, don't try and rotate the baby unless 000 tells you to, unless, for example, there is a shoulder stuck and they actually tell you how to manually rotate it. But otherwise, don't do anything. Just let me do it, and basically grab the baby so it doesn't fall on the floor, and don't touch the cord, don't cut it, and so on, right? So basically at this point, Jason can see the head, and he's saying it to 000. I think the lady on the phone, she was still hoping that the ambulance would make it. Disclaimer, the ambulance did not make it. We were on our own. The whole time I was really, 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 at this point, I'm in my zone, and I know that it's going to be just fine because my waters have broken. I know from there on that it's going to be quick. So I'm pretty confident that unless the ambulance is 2 minutes away, they're not going to make it, and I can do it. I can push. I have contractions. It's fine. So basically what happened from there on is I basically pushed because there was no way I could not push, obviously. And the head came out. And with our first, basically, it was like, I think for the first birth, I had the fetal ejection reflex. So basically the head came out, and then it was like she was fully out. Whereas with this one, the head came out and then it got stuck. So basically baby's head was out pretty much to its mouth, and there was fluid coming out of her mouth and nose, but she wasn't fully out. And at that point, I didn't have a contraction anymore, and I can feel in Jason's voice, the way he's telling me, you need to push, I'm understanding that there's a problem, and that probably baby's stuck, and probably she's turning blue at this point, right? So I'm understanding that, and I have no contraction. So I'm starting to panic, but then I'm trying not to, because obviously I know that if I panic, it's not going to help. And then thankfully, within probably a few seconds, I had another contraction. I was able to push her out fully. That didn't even have any problem with, shoulder dystocia or anything. And the other thing worth mentioning is I had always said to Jason that if baby was coming this quickly, there was no problem. It was going to be fine. There was going to be no need to intervene, and it was all going to be just fine, which it was. And I think if you believe that, I think it also helps, right? And so basically, because I'm going to have to make this very quick now because baby is awake, basically baby girl was born. She was caught by her dad, Jason, who did amazing, did not panic at any point. He caught her as she came out, and the cord was very long, so I was able to just hold her onto my chest afterwards. She was fine. She was breathing. She had a little cry, and then she fed. And the ambulance arrived thinking that they were going to help me birth inside a caravan. And they opened the door of the caravan thinking, oh, okay, well, let's get ready. We're going to have a birth here, just to find out that, I was fine, baby was fine. And so I think I'm going to have to cut it here, maybe at least for now. But anyway, this is the story of baby girl being born on the floor of our caravan just about 2 hours after my first contraction happened. And she was born at home without any intervention, caught by her dad. She was very fine. I was very fine. This is actually the second take of recording my birth story because I was just about done last time, and baby decided that it was time for her to feed or do something, but she didn't want to listen to her own birth story anymore. So I had to do a second take because I really wanted to finish and not leave it where it was up to. I was just about to finish. So I think I was up to the part where I felt like there was pressure down in my bottom. And at that point, I just knew that we couldn't make it to the car for the only reason that it was a 45-minute drive, and it wouldn't have been safe for me to get in the car while I've got the urge to push already and then drive and basically hope that we make it to the hospital without me having to birth on the side of the road on country roads that are not lit, where it's really dangerous to even stop on the side, where you'd have a lot of trouble if you were to give your location to the ambulance, even with a GPS point. So at this point, I just knew that this baby would not be born in a hospital, which, funny enough, it never worried me. I think at this point, when I'm realizing that, I'm trying not to think. I'm trying not to use my thinking brain. But I think at that point, I am realizing that this baby will not be born in the hospital. Things will not go according to plan. I had mapped my birth, and I had a student midwife that I really wanted her at my birth. And then I was happy to go into the hospital when I felt the time was right. I didn't want to go in too early, but also, I didn't want to go in too late. if that's even the thing. At this point, I'm realizing that this baby will not be born in a hospital. And I think I was not panicking. I didn't feel bad about it. Not bad in terms of like, what I mean by not bad is I didn't feel panicky. It didn't scare me. I just knew, and I've always said that to Jason, that if things were happening quickly, like they were right now, then things were fine. Everything was going to be just fine. And I mean, I don't know if it's me or if it's because I believed it or whether things were going to be fine anyway, but things were absolutely fine. There was no need to intervene. I didn't have to do anything. I just pushed because I felt like pushing, and that was it. It was happening really quickly compared to my very first birth, where the pushing phase was actually quite long. And I think it's because maybe I wasn't in the best position, and or you've got less oxytocin. As I said, I had a lot of panic in this labor, so I probably had a lot less oxytocin. Whereas this time around, I've got oxytocin flowing as I am full of oxytocin, and all I can think about is I'm going to birth this baby here, and I'm really happy about it because, well, everything's going to be fine. And the alternate scenario where either I'm taken in by the ambulance or I'm going into the car, to me are not safe anyway. I didn't want to birth in an ambulance either. So yeah, I'm feeling really safe. You know, again, we talk about the pillars of birth: being safe, being undisturbed, and being unobserved. I was definitely undisturbed because, well, there was no one that was disturbing my birth. Jason was basically watching and reporting to the operating lady, but there was nothing that he was doing to interfere. And I definitely was unobserved because, well, I mean, Jason was there, but that was it, right? And it's a very intimate moment, but it was great to share it with him, and it was just the two of us, right? And so at this point, my waters have broken, and Jason can see the head emerging, and I can feel the head as well. So I start pushing, and then the head comes out, but it comes up to about like nose, between the nose and the mouth height, and then it stops there. And so at this point, I'm realizing that the head is out. I'm not really realizing how much of it is out or anything. And then Jason saying, "Oh, the head is out. I can see it." And there's fluid coming out of the mouth and the nose, basically. And basically, at this point, I'm hearing in his voice that he's telling me what the operating lady is telling him, which is she needs to push. And I'm hearing that he's not just telling me, "Oh, you need to push, to birth this baby quickly," or it's not because he can't wait to meet his baby. It's because I'm hearing it in his voice. I'm hearing there is a problem, and and at this point I'm thinking, okay, I think baby's turning blue, because otherwise he wouldn't be so pressing. There wouldn't be that tone in his voice that's telling me that you really need to push. And I have no contraction at this point, and so I'm starting to almost panic. But then I'm thinking, well, if I panic, this is going to make things worse. So I need to go with the flow because it's totally normal that I don't have a contraction right now. And before you knew it, again, time is so fluid in labor. Before I knew it, within maybe 20 or 30 seconds, there was another contraction, and I just pushed, and she was fully out. And that was it. And basically, because of the way that I was positioned, Jason was able to basically catch baby girl in his arms and then pass her to me. And that was it. Like, and there was the ambulance didn't arrive for another 15 minutes. And at no point did I feel scared, worried, panicky, or anything like that. I think I was in total shock of what happened, even though I knew what happened. But I was just like, oh, it's like it was so quick, because in the end, the labor was 2 hours. And so therefore, I'm thinking, hang on, 2 hours ago I was pregnant and I was asleep as well. And now I'm fully awake and I've got this baby in my arms. That's a bit strange. Like, the processing time where you go, things look different 2 hours ago. And so I was so glad at this point that our toddler went to her grandmother like really early into my labor, because in the end, my labor wasn't that long. So there would have been a point where it would have been like I would have been wanting to push or feeling the urge to push, and Jason would have had to take her to her grandma, and it would have been like, whoa, now is really not the time for you to go. So yeah, I was really glad at this point that she wasn't there, mostly because and so I was so glad at this point that our toddler went to her grandmother like really early into my labor, because in the end, my labor wasn't that long. So there would have been a point where it would have been like I would have been wanting to push or feeling the urge to push, and Jason would have had to take her. I don't know how she would have reacted, and it would have been really difficult for Jason to handle both me and catching his baby, and then also a toddler who may or may not have been distressed and so on, right? So yeah, that was really like we didn't really get the golden hour as such. So what happened after that is 15 minutes later the ambulance rocked up, and it's so funny when they opened the door, because I still remember to this day their faces. And their faces is like they're ready. They're ready to jump into action. They're ready to help with the birth and stuff. And they open the door and they see that baby's been born. And then they're like, "Oh, okay, I'll go get my bag then." And I'm thinking, yeah, you will. You missed it all, mate. Um, yeah, so I think they were expecting, and maybe they were quite happy to have, something different in their day-to-day job happening. And no, they missed the birth. They were just there. They checked me, they checked baby, but they do some very quick examination, because well, they're not that they're just paramedics, but they're not obviously specialized in birth or anything. So they checked, and one thing I wasn't worried about, and that was mentioned, when Jason was on the phone and the paramedics were there, they were asking about my blood loss. And I think at no point did I even think, oh yeah, I could bleed a lot, and obviously that could be really, really dangerous, and that would be an absolute emergency. I didn't even think of it. I was just in this bubble of going, wow, 2 hours ago I was asleep and I was pregnant, and now I'm very much not pregnant, and I've got this little one in my arms, and it's absolutely crazy. So yeah, so then I was taken into hospital with the ambulance and baby girl, because we were still very much attached. I was the talk of the hospital when I got there, because, well, I had called, well, not me, but Jason had called the maternity, the birthing suite, to tell them that I was in labor. And then basically I've arrived 2 hours later with the paramedics, with the baby. And yeah, I didn't need them. So this is the story of my accidental free birth that was definitely not planned. Baby was born in the caravan that we live in, which is very special, because I can look at the spot that she was born in, and I can just go, oh yeah, I remember that night. That was quite epic. So yeah, there you go. I've had this question afterwards, and I didn't even think of it. The question was the cleanup hard? No, it wasn't. Like, honestly, it was pretty clean, actually. I don't know why exactly, because obviously my waters broke on the floor, so there was obviously amniotic fluid. Baby pooped pretty much as she was born, and so, I mean, it's birth, it's messy, there's blood, right? But it wasn't actually that messy when we came back. I don't know if, I don't remember the paramedics cleaning up anything, because I was like sitting on the floor and they didn't have a lot of room, to like clean and stuff. But honestly, it wasn't messy at all. Like, obviously, had to wash towels. We had to use all the towels we owned too. Like, obviously, we don't have a lot of towels living in a caravan. We used them all. So, it was quite good, because it was like, do we even have towels left for when we get home? Do we even have towels to actually, like, dry ourselves after the shower? So yeah, that was that was quite interesting. I think we did, like, we've only got a small washing machine. We ended up doing 2 or 3 loads of just towels, right? That was a lot. Yeah, anyway, the other thing I wanted to touch on to finish off this podcast is the parenting journey. So when our little one was born, our toddler was 22 months. So we had two under two, I guess. And parenting the second time around was a lot easier, especially parenting a newborn was easy. Parenting a toddler is a whole different world that I might do a podcast on one day. But I found that parenting this new baby was so much easier this time around. And I don't know if it's because we trusted ourselves. Like we just went, oh, well, we've done it before. Like, we obviously it was like just about 2 years before that we had our toddler, but it just felt more intuitive. It felt more, everything was just so much easier, and there was a lot less second guessing, like a lot less like, oh, should I do this or should I do that? Or, oh, it's not good if I do this. There was a lot less of that. It was just like, you know what, we'll take it as it comes. We'll take it day by day. And yeah, it was just a lot easier. And also in terms of how our toddler met our baby, so she was at her grandma for a few days, and then when we came home from the hospital, we picked up our toddler, and so I was already in the van and the baby was on the bed, and then we brought in our toddler and we put her on the bed near her sister, and then our toddler just looked at her sister and went, and she, and I don't know why she was attracted to her hands. And to this day, she loves touching her sister's hands. I don't know if it's anyone else out there, but from the get-go, she was fascinated with her hands. And if you can imagine, a newborn's hand is like this fist, right? That like they just keep it tight and stuff. Like, I don't know, she's just obsessed with her hands. It's just really interesting. I just love it. I don't know why, but yeah, from the get-go, she's obsessed with her hands. So there you go. And it almost felt like the baby was always there. Like, I don't know how to explain, because it's like, obviously when we started parenting the two, it's like, obviously the baby's a few days old, but it just felt like she'd always been there. So yes, it's not easy. Two under two is not easy. And obviously it's mostly the most demanding, the most like child that demands the most attention is actually the toddler. So if it's you out there and you're pregnant and you've got a toddler, just know it's probably highly likely that the high demand child is going to be your toddler. It's not going to be the newborn. And yeah, I've had to learn to do things like, I breastfeed, and then I'm also trying to, read a book or play with blocks with one hand, which is also happens to be my left hand. I've learned to draw things. I'm really not good at drawing, which is fine, but I'm really not good at it. But I've had to learn to draw with my left hand, because a lot of the time when my toddler wants me to draw whatever it is that I'm meant to draw, my right hand is busy with breastfeeding. So like I've learned to draw with my left, which is even worse than me drawing with my right. So yeah, you adapt, right? Like as mums, as parents, we just adapt to things, right? We just do things, we take it as it comes, and and I think this is what I'm going to finish on, is you can do it. It's not easy every day, and some days you'll be like, oh, and other days there'll be like absolute bliss, and you'll just see your two, your toddler, your baby, just bond, and you'll just go, wow, I don't know if they'll ever remember that. And it's like, and they've just got this bond that you cannot describe, that you cannot explain, that was there from the get-go. It's obviously it's building stronger as days go on, but it was there from the get-go, and I cannot explain it. And it's fascinating to watch. I love it. So on this note, I will leave you to it. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Tell me in the comments if what you thought of this, because I thought that was wild. Obviously, anyone who's had a free birth is probably thinking, well, yeah, she just birthed on her own, that's fine. But I mean, that was not my plan at all. And so it was so wild. And the labor was so quick and so intense. I was not expecting it. Everything was just unexpected. And yeah, what an experience it was. For sure. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I will leave you to it, and I will be back next week with a brand new episode. So stay tuned. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to get notified of when a new episode comes out, please subscribe to this show on your podcast listening platform. Also, I would really appreciate it if you could leave me a review on Apple Podcast or share this episode so that other moms can find it. If you would like to tell your own pregnancy, birth, or parenting story, please head to the show notes and you will find a form there to get in touch with me. Again, thank you so much for listening, and I will be with you again next week for a new episode.